I'm Jason Spangler, CTO of Descendent Studios, working on Descent Underground, as you all know. And with me is, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Finn Staber. I am a programmer designer at Portalarium here in Austin, working on Shroud of the Avatar with Richard Garriott, and big VR enthusiast and VR developer. So we are here to talk about VR, best practices, and roadmaps for the future.
As a lot of you know, for Descent Underground, we are planning full VR support, where you can play the game with like today's VR headsets and the future ones, with following best practices for VR, with being able to have the HUD and such, with game menus and in game. And I think it's going to be really cool because being down in the mines and in the asteroids with all of the walls close by as you fly fast and fight with other ships, there's just going to be a lot of action and a lot of movement around you. And with the twisting 3D mazes inside the asteroids with the old mines, I think they'll just kind of be a mind-stretching experience navigating them.
Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, I remember one of the things in my mind, thinking back of Descent originally, playing, in my high school teachers' computers on a Novell network, that we got in there, and when we were playing multiplayer Descent, I remember, one of the common functionality that I'd do is like, I'm creeping up around a corner of an opening, and I'd kind of like strafe through it while aiming down there, and then you maybe just zip around. I see somebody, then I just back up and zip around as I'm shooting at them, And I think that's the kind of thing that VR is kind of perfect for, is giving you that extra avenue of angle and immersion that you're in that cockpit, creeping around that corner from any angle. And that was one of the things I remember also that was very unique for Descent's flight controls, was like, you're not just this rear force-driven ship. You're a multi-axis movement, creeping angled harvester or something. It was just an extra. It was different, It was similar enough to where you could still control it like a flight simulator, but different enough to where it wasn't anything else. It was Descent, and I think that was pretty awesome.
One of the things I've read and learned from the Descent community, but I never had a chance to try myself, is one of the older Descents actually had support for one of those old 90s VR systems. I can imagine the low resolution and high latency made it hard to play, but it's kind of cool that an early Descent had VR support.
Yeah, that is cool. I didn't know that. Probably weighed like 5 pounds and gave you neck injuries from turning your head too sharply. But
did you? Back in college, what was it? Virtuality? Somebody visited the university and had one of the big old virtuality systems.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
This is back in back in the 90s. And it had this massive headset and it was very low frame rate, very high latency, all flat shaded.
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember getting in. Well, I remember getting into some virtual reality experiences where you had to push your face against the headset. It was like a mounted headset. You push your face against it, and then you could like control the whole thing. And so you had 2 handles, and you're moving the whole thing, but you had to keep your forehead pushing against the thing. And it was just it was not where we are today. And who knows where we'll be this time next year.
One thing we can start out with is the challenges of developing for VR today and trying to future-proof it for tomorrow. I know one of the big things that some game engines do well, some don't, is that whole input to photon latency. When you move your head or control your character or ship in the game, the getting that delay to be as small as possible to keep the feeling of presence and immersion is important.
Yeah, well, it keeps the immersion. It keeps you from getting, simulator sickness. It keeps you from all these different things. And as we see the technology increasing, with the HTC Vive and the DK2, and now with the consumer ready version of the Oculus coming out, as well as the slew of other, HMDs that are coming out with OSVR and, FOV and eye tracking and all these different things that are coming. They're just, paving the ground, opening the door for other manufacturers to use the technology and build upon that. And I think those things that we're learning at this stage, where we're making these games and we're playing these other games that were made and finding that some people get sick because of this or some people just don't like the way it moves because of this. I think those are some of the rules that then get brought back to the manufacturing and built into it, like we're seeing, with the delay in that resonance in the HTC Vive. They actually, 8 times a second, they basically don't refresh the screen or something like that, and so the way they do it matches naturally with the human brain's upkeep of that photon resonance, because basically, the way the eye works is you have the cones that are taking in all that all the color, and saying what color is something and where is things and updating constantly, versus your rods, which are taking in mass amounts of energy and mass amounts of photons and absorbing them, and then your brain just naturally says, don't pay attention until something changes, right? I know that the edge of this table is right there. I don't need to keep on renewing it. Versus, but if you're looking at a screen right there that's keeping renewing it as you're turning, it's unnatural that you don't realize what is making it feel unnatural. But then whenever they hook into it and they get it a little bit better, like with the HTC Vive and with the next version of Oculus, you put it on there and you can't quite put your finger on why it feels better, but it just does. And I think that's what we're going to see. Well, that's what I hope we see as we get more and more new technology.
I haven't got an opportunity to try the Vive yet, but I think I'm jealous because I think you have.
Yeah. Actually, here in Austin, we just did an amazing, the first Valve HTC Vive game jam last month. We did a game jam. We had an amazing turnout, something like 150 developers, and all weekend we had a huge facility that we had catering, and it was just really cool. It was a great event. We had 19 amazing experiences built out by Sunday, and then we had another meetup on Monday night, and had the VR Austin meetup, which is a cool developer group. And we all came together and had all the demos up on 3 different Vives upstairs and little with the lighthouses and stuff. And that's one of those things, as we're seeing, oh, look, this lighthouse tracking technology lets your head move around. And the DK2 said, hey, look, it lets your head move around. And then the lighthouse is like, hey, look, you do it with 2 and it's even more intricate. And now we see with, the consumer ready version of the Oculus improving that even more. And, right? Who's going to take the reins on being the best, infrared setup? Is it Valve? Is it Microsoft with the Kinect 2 being able to hook up with the Room Toolkit, multiple Kinect 2s for your computer and network them together? Now you have, full room support through a Kinect 2, which has an amazing high def, just regular camera on it too. So then you can start really doing a lot of interesting things with holodeck type experiences, or you're in the craft, and then there's an area over there you can go to, or even if you're just mounted to your seat, still just being able to do this versus being completely tracked is just it's night and day, right? So I think with that type of technology, as well as driving the price point down of these headsets with manufacturing costs, I think the projection is still 2016 is whenever everybody's actually going to start hearing about it. Because if you ask the normal person on the street about VR, they don't know. I carry a Google Cardboard down the street, and people might look at you funny, or they might not even notice it because it doesn't stick out to them yet. But next year they're going to really start to, and then in 2017 it's projected that a lot of people are going to be purchasing whatever is the new technology at that point.
Uh-huh.
So you look at the pioneers like Oculus, HTC, Fove, and the different manufacturers that are really getting their feet wet.
And Sony with the Morpheus.
Yeah, Sony with the Morpheus, right? How can you forget that?
And they particularly have some challenges. I know even on PC games, we have the challenges that VR has to render typically a lot more pixels now with these higher resolution screens we're getting.
Right.
They per frame and with really high frame rates than a standard render 2D screen game. So we have to basically end up spending less. We have to spend less processing time per pixel in VR, so that can make the two look different. But then with the Sony, I mean, that's a console with slightly older hardware than the cutting edge PCs, so they have an even greater challenge.
Like that's the system requirements on any VR, whatever's new and the best beast you could possibly put together next year is what it really means.
So in Descent Underground being like a first-person vehicle-based game, you wearing your VR headset, it's kind of funny with our fiction, you're actually kind of piloting a drone with a VR-like setup in the harvester. So we're going to make it feel like you're in the drone piloting the ship and put the HUD on geometry, simulating a cockpit, have support, head tracking fully so you can kind of lean in and around in your cockpit to kind of get slightly different view. Of course, and try to go with high frame. We're going to aim for high frame rates and make our detail level, our graphical settings flexible so that we can turn down the graphical settings to get higher frame rates if maybe somebody doesn't have the top end hardware. But with us having a joystick and such, I think it makes it pretty straightforward. Our kind of VR implementation, kind of the design of our VR, because it's basically just putting you in the cockpit. But then there's other games like third-person games that can be like very different.
Or keyboard mouse controls versus joystick. That's a big one. With games that are driven on keyboard and mouse, you see that to be able to make the game is equally playable in VR. It's kind of hard to sometimes match all those controls and all the functionality that you'd normally have being able to see your keyboard. So typically for those type of games, especially, I'm predicting that we're going to see a lot of these large scale AAA games that instead of supporting a full support, it depends. Like you're saying, like you're doing a cockpit driven game, which is like perfect for VR. It's almost like it's really easy to say like that experience is made for VR. You could even do similar HUD elements for the 2D version, and it would still look awesome. It would be very immersive. Everyone loves a holographic HUD that floats that they can still select with. I mean, that's just awesome. You know what I mean? So I'm really excited to see how y'all approach that. And
our gameplay, I think, is. Our ships are not so incredibly complex that we'll be able to have users, but we'll have default mappings for the joysticks, but we'll be able to have all the controls on a single like high-end joystick with lots of buttons. So hopefully we can avoid a lot of the find the key on the keyboard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and with the mouse, mixed with your head tracking, you can do a lot. Same as with your joystick, mixed with your head tracking. Your center of focus can work as an indication of action, and then you can do things to affirm that action. And so that becomes an extra thing that you can do in space. In 3D spaces. I look to this HUD area, and two things pop out. I look at it. A system of things pop out, and then I can go to them and select the one I want, and it allows you to open up these cool 3D HUDs that actually people end up really enjoying just exploring your HUD. I mean, it's so funny. I get into Elite Dangerous or something, I put it in there, I'm like, yeah, this is how you do it, and you play these other awesome games that have pioneered into the space, and it's like sometimes you feel like, oh, this is not what we're going to do. Or sometimes you're like, you feel it and you're like, wow, I can tell that they must have iterated on this functionality and it feels just right for VR specifically. It feels like, you're getting an experience that could only be this experience in VR. And I think that's one of the other really cool things about VR is that sometimes you get to have these interactive experiences that would only function that way in VR. Like you could simulate the same thing with a mouse, but it just wouldn't be the same, and so
just not nearly as cool as immersive. It's like, oh, this is kind of neat, but then try it in VR and it's like, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah, and you're like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just looking at the option screen. It's like, all right, cool. Like the way it scrolls, though, And so that's kind of interesting to see what y'all are going to be doing with your HUD interface. I'm a big Descent fan, of course, and I was a backer on your project. So
I was a backer on Shroud the Avatar.
Yeah, thanks. It's pretty cool to be working with the consumer community and fellow developers from other studios and stuff on these, because with the crowdfunding and just VR in general, VR is still a community. It's not a big consumer base yet, but so a lot of the input you have from fans and from people that want to see this particular functionality in your game, a lot of that comes from fellow developers, and which is really cool. And I was imagining is y'all doing Descent. That's a game that a lot of people back when they set it up were kind of techies, so the people that probably loved your game, just like the people that loved Ultima and stuff, loved immersive games, but also because it was, this multiplayer game, in order to have that functionality in the game, you almost had to be, you definitely were the person that everybody in your family came to whenever the printer broke. You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of interesting to see all those people in one fan base, and then their input is very interesting, because it's not your typical input you just have on a typical Steam game that just went straight to. It's like, oh, the marketing's there. It's a big AAA with a big publisher, and they paid for a lot, so everybody hears about it. But they didn't hear about it until it was ready to be talked about, right? And so it's the Kickstarter community. It's so different to hear these features in from your potential, your best customers, your big backers and stuff, telling you what they're interested in and stuff, because then you can tailor that to them, in your pre-alphas, and then get that feedback again. So it's like you have this giant testing community, which in VR support is going to be huge, right? You're gonna be the features change with the hardware, right? With the better hardware, then you're like, okay, well, let's move that functionality out and put this new. So I'd be interested to see kind of what your pipeline is for building the functionality and the design, but making it independent of which HMD SDK, which control is it, well, we want to be able to have joystick, but it'd be really cool if you could do this one thing and put the leap on, use your leap motion and do this one interaction, but you don't need a leap, right? It's the same thing of like, well, I love VR, but you shouldn't have to only have VR, because then people don't know what they're missing, right? Like, I don't know anybody that plays 2D versions of a full 3D game that came forth, it's just, there's not many of them. The ones that are made purely for VR are tailored for shaders and graphics in VR, so it has to be toned down a little bit, it has to be managed more tightly, and so they don't ever go, well, let's just not even worry about 2D, because then it'll look like a more basic version of a 2D game. But it's going to
be challenging for us, probably for many games, to make it look that try to go both for rendering on a 2D screen and in VR to make it look as good as it can in both instances.
Yeah, I think it's a big pipeline kind of evolution that we're seeing with the development. Back before, we just made one thing for a PC. Now, PC Mac Linux. Now, PC Mac Linux with VR support. No, go back to just Windows. And then it's like, oh, well, but we want to have a mobile client that has some of our art. Well, that's actually a completely different thing with a it's like, and so managing these different project pipelines and different functionality pipelines are that's an evolving process, right? And so I'd be interested to see what becomes that standard for development, for saying, okay, well, we're building actually an LOD system into all the assets to where VR goes to this LOD, you know what I mean? And then with this set of shaders, with this set of, environment effects. But then without having to change everything out, I can go back in and have the same build running on PC and go out of goggle mode. And now I have, my bloom current turns up, my ambient occlusion turns up, and all these different things that are post-process rendering that you had to kind of cut out for your HMD get to come back on, and it's that's kind of one of those things that you set up early on in your camera controller functionality. It's like, but whereas 2 years ago we didn't have the hardware to experiment with. So
I wonder if Unreal Engine 4 has basically I think they actually call it a launch baker, where it can target PCs, Mac, Linux, consoles, mobile, web via Emscriptum and such. I wonder if they'll be able to take some of that, and you also use it for VR to bake the different versions of the assets for VR to get the higher frame rates.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see where the tools start providing support for, like Unity. We're a Unity development studio, and it's awesome. Unity 5.1 just came out with their big release and said this is the VR support release. And so it has all these HMD tracking specific features and rendering pipeline kind of changes that allow you to hook into certain things and have extended displays and all these different things that before, whenever you were having to do it, it would cause a whole other processing loop, and so it'd slow down your frame rate. And so like the engines, these game engines are seeing what the tip of the spear developers are doing to get the desired functionality to work, and then hitting these walls, then they're saying, okay, we'll implement that in the engine, right? So it's really cool to see where like Unreal's 4 is going with Unity, and where they're both, they're in competition, but as far as developers are concerned, we're like, well, we want both of them to be awesome. We just want games to be awesome. We want to make our games awesome, and we want to be able to have these type of tools to make the coolest thing. I
know there's development houses out there that actually use Unity for one game and Unreal Engine for another game.
Yeah, I love both. I have great buddies at Unity, and so they've been like super awesome with us. I love them, but Unreal's been doing a lot for their own development community, and in turn that is healthy competition, because then it keeps Unity also wanting to produce amazing content back for theirs, and so both of them are trying to be the sharpest tip of the spear. And as far as the developer is concerned, that just works, because then it's like, great, better tools, great, awesome, better tools. What are you working with? It doesn't matter, better tools. So so I think that's really cool, because I want to see. The end result is I want to play an awesome game that I kickstarted.
So some of the next challenges for VR and Descent Underground include high frame rates, getting head tracking and the camera rate in the drone, so you can have the feeling of presence and pilot it really efficiently in VR, and also moving our HUD and our menu system into in our kind of like the targeting reticle into VR in a way that works well for VR. And along with those lines, those can really be can be really challenging from a gameplay perspective and from polish. But we love VR, a lot of the new hardware coming out and the hardware that's out there now. So we're really excited to have the chance to do all that. Also wanted to thank our guest Finn for his VR expertise and discussion. It's always fun for us to get together and talk about current and future state of VR and what's happening in the kind of the indie development community.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure being here and being able to chime in. Thanks for having me and letting me carry my super heavy Google Cardboard up this flight of stairs.
Which I'd like to try that after the show.
Yeah, as long as you
had a chance to try
just don't get it wet, you know what I mean? These as well as mobile VR. I think that's one of the big things that people are really interested in. Like, oh well, the price point goes way down whenever I get to use my own phone. So having having experiences on a single experience on a mobile device that allows you to still feel something and have that in a more that's one of those things that I think we're also going to see a lot of things carry into, as well as smart glasses. The Epson Vivario and the Microsoft HoloLens. Those are definitely and the Magic Leap. It's a projected light field onto just a lens in front of you, so you can look around and there's no more blinders. Being able to experience things in that's a very cool thing.
And they're probably a lot more. They have the potential to be a lot more accessible than the larger.
Yeah, I was gonna actually bring my
headsets.
my Epson Vivario smart glasses. I left them at the studio on accident, but it's really cool. They're not the consumer ready thing, but they're a window into where we're going to be in the future. With this projected light field technology, or just really high def screens with a really high quality lens in front of you. The better and better it gets with the more and more field of view that you get, it just the immersion factor goes up, and the kind of things that we can then do with the more intricate functionality, it goes up. So the things you want to do with your HUD increase as the tools get better. So I'm really interested to see where our technology goes, as well as where games specifically like y'all's go, because it's a game that I love the IP itself. It's just awesome, but the style of game, it's just one of those that's perfect for VR. So I'm really excited to see what your team here in Austin is doing.
Thanks, Finn, and thank you, and thanks for joining us on Tech Underground, and we'll see you later.